territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Coast Salish peoples. The meeting is being live streamed, and the audio and visual recordings will also be available to the public for viewing after the meeting. Footage of the meeting may be viewed inside and outside of Canada, so just be aware of that. And the board has a strong commitment to ethical conduct, and this includes the responsibility of the committee members to conduct themselves with appropriate decorum and professionalism. And as chair of this committee, it's my responsibility to see that that decorum is maintained. And so just request that you speak through the chair, that you staff be able to submit objective reports, and committee members refrain from any kind of language that would be inflammatory. So first on our agenda is the delegation. Chris Chernin and Tate Chernin. Tate is going to be delivering, and or both are going to be delivering. Okay, and you have about 10 minutes, so go right ahead.
First of all, thank you very much for allowing us the opportunity to be here with you today and share what I have to say, and absolutely welcome any questions any of you have, stakeholders, trustees. So I'm trying to break this down hopefully quickly in just a couple of minutes, what we have, what we're wanting or needing, and why, and then let him share his thoughts. When we currently have a hate crime or a hateful incident take place in the district, such as the Lord Byng video back in November of 2018, or the hateful list that was circulated in Canberra in March of this year, right now it seems to be a disproportionate share of time, resources directed towards the perpetrators and supporting them. And there seems to be an inadequate amount of support for those that are impacted by these acts. And it seems to be an inconsistent type of response across the district. What we have right now seems to be a lot of debate and conversation about was something a crime or was it not a crime, or conversations, seems to be endless conversations about what were the motivations, did they really mean what they were trying to do. And often what we have right now is that the response is discreet and it takes place away from the community. And something that I received as a parent just a couple of weeks ago was an email that I listed in documents for you to take a look at today. And it was the Student Threat Risk Assessment Protocol. And for me as a parent, immediately I thought it's, again, skewed towards the action, skewed towards the perpetrators, and not towards those impacted. What we need, what we're wanting, what I would like to see as a parent is a different kind of email, or an email that comes at the same time, and an email maybe with the heading Student Threat Structured Response for those impacted protocol, impact focused. I'm not a specialist. The staff that we have in the district, people like Selma Smith, Renee Hawk, well-intentioned, incredibly skilled at what they do, but not delivering the kind of support that we're asking for now. I don't know how they could. Renee, and now recently, when Gil hired 2 staff people, we have 54,000 students. That seems to be a lopsided kind of resource for dealing with hate crime, hate acts. The structured response that I'm looking for, that this motion that is before you from Trustee Reddy requires a specialist. The motion asks for this specialist. It's not to reduce at all the support for the perpetrators. I think they're hurting. I think they need support, but we need to add far more support to those impacted by these acts. Why? Well, the issue at Hamburg happened in March of this year, and I'm here today in October. I have no more answers. I don't feel that my school that my son's at is any safer than it was in March. I'm sure people here are familiar with the Lord Byng parents that were coming to the district saying that they were feeling inadequately supported as recently as September, just a couple of weeks ago. Those impacted by these hateful acts are telling you you need support. There are too many similarities between what happened at Lord Byng and Hamburg. It's a pattern of concern with regards to consequence, restitution, and support for those impacted. And I regret to say now that there are far too many similarities with what happened in Hamilton. And I don't want those kinds of similarities. A structured response for support for those impacted by these hateful acts, if it's done publicly, if it's done transparently, I believe it ends up being a clear declaration through our actions to those impacted that you matter, that you are supported, and that we will protect you. I don't think that is the feeling of many students and staff and students' families right now. And to wrap this up, what I believe is a more structured response to support those impacted by these hateful acts ultimately ends up being prevention. We're looking for preventative tools to make sure these kinds of things don't happen. If we support and we make these public declarations that what happened was horrible, but what happened can't happen, and what happened is going to get support for those impacted, that is a very, very clear statement that you don't put up with this, and that you do matter, and that you are supported, and that you will be safe. Superintendent Hoffman made a presentation very recently about student success, and I think it was an excellent presentation. And I think absolutely paramount to students having success is students feeling safe. And I don't think we're doing that right now, and that's why I think this motion should be considered and discussed here and hopefully moved on to the board.
Thank you. I agree with everything that my dad has just explained to everyone. I'm in all support of this, of what we've brought here, which is some clear guidelines as what to do when something like this happens again, because firsthand, when I brought my concerns to the people I was told to bring them to, I realized that they had their hands tied and they didn't know what to do. And as someone who is a child and does not always know what to do, it's scary when the people that you think are going to figure it all out, like, don't have any of the tools to figure it out, or what they do have is inadequate. And so there had to be like third-party people to come in to help manage it, and going forward, if that's established at the beginning, then people will have that support, and the kids that are affected receive the level of attention that what happened deserves. Because I think too often they don't. And so I think for the next time this happens and the time after that, because the stuff will continue to happen until it's really addressed. But when it does happen, if there is not a way to have a concrete way of dealing with it and managing it, and at least having a set of guidelines and procedures to follow, then kids will continue to feel unsupported and unsafe. And I still, to this day, I still feel unsafe sometimes in my school, walking down certain hallways or by certain people. And it's because there's not a recognition that this is serious, and that if we deal with it in the same way that we deal with, like, sticking gum under a desk, then it's not going to change. So I ask as a student, for your support in something that I think is incredibly important. That without there just isn't enough attention brought to these events that need a serious amount of attention. And if there's a set way to deal with it, or at least try to deal with it, that's, I think, the first step. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tate. And I appreciate you coming forward. This takes a lot of courage to do that, and we all appreciate that. So we have some comments from the trustees and committee.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. And I know that you have done a lot of work in the community after the event as well to try to bring some healing that, you know, as a district, you weren't able to provide. So, like, really big thank you for stepping up to do that. I guess to clarify a little bit, Tate and Nick had organized a Reconciliation Canada event, and maybe you can speak more when my question's done about what you did there. But I was also, I guess my main question is, I want to know that, so I know from my perspective that the district has done some stuff, and I'm wondering if any of that stuff, any of those components were helpful. We know that my understanding is that some counseling was offered to some families. I don't know how far-reaching that was and what kind of the effects those are, and I want to hear from your perspective what that was like for you.
Well, just right there, like, for like what was offered, like, for example, I was on it, on the list, like, targeted, and I didn't receive like any communication. No one contacted me or reached out to me or my families or of any sort. And maybe I was absent on the day that they made like an announcement, but that's no excuse as to why I shouldn't get support for something that internally might be very destructive, super hurtful. So like firsthand, I know I didn't receive any form of personal, anyone reaching out to me, which is why I'm so passionate about this, because I'm the lucky one that has the support from my family and has a wonderful friend group, and I have the resources within myself to be confident with who I am and be strong, but not everyone does, which is why I was really upset when I wasn't contacted, because if I wasn't who I was, who knows where that would have led, and if I would have been comfortable going back to the school the day after and the day after that, and for the rest of however long there, which was a huge reason why we did the Reconciliation Canada partnership, but the event was, it was organized by Reconciliation Canada in cooperation with us, and we had planned an event where we were just going to mainly talk. I was sharing my story, my dad was speaking, and then a couple of members of Reconciliation Canada, the CEO, and then Chief Joseph was speaking. And just about, this was a lot about, the whole event was about healing, and it was for anyone who was affected, anyone who still needed support. And it was a lovely event. It went really well, but with a much smaller turnout than what was hoped for. But a lot of good came out of it, but I just wish that same healing that happened there could have been provided for not just me being the only student affected in the room, but open to everyone who felt that they needed support. So that's what that event was. It was, we were speaking about hate in general, love, and healing for people who are suffering from any form of hate.
Just to add to that, our initial intention was for that event to be, we wanted two events. One was for the greater community, where we invited anyone from outside the school system to come and participate and be part of the healing, because this is something that has very far-reaching effects. We wanted that to happen in an evening where community members could come, and we wanted the second part to happen in the school during the day. We could put that invitation out to every student, anyone who wanted to come and participate, and fill that room and just talk. And we couldn't get the space. We asked, couldn't get it. So Reconciliation Canada reached out to partners of theirs, and thankfully the Jewish Community Center said yes immediately and provided that space at Jewish Community Center to allow this to happen. And so we had the one event set up for hundreds, and we had, I think, about 40 people show up. Two individuals from district come. Wonderful events, and I think the positive was we had a template what a healing event can look like. That would be, I would think, part of something that one of the outside specialists that we're looking for to create a structured response would integrate and work with community partners. Is what could this support look like? And it would be partnering with someone like Reconciliation Canada, experts in healing. And that's, so I think the positive was there was a template. And as a parent, in the one letter, the one communication I got from the school about that event, I didn't read. It mentioned that we were going to get support, that the students were being caught. And again, that was in the letter from the school. And important.
Catherine?
Thank you for your presentation. And just so you know, I'm here on behalf of Vancouver Secondary Teachers. And I just had a couple of questions about your presentation, the two diversity staff members who are actually two of our members, who, as you aptly said, are there for 54,000 students. So am I hearing that you think there should be more staff? Like, I'm trying to understand the piece around an outside specialist, expert, whatever title they have. How does that connect to the VSB staff that we have? So I'm just trying to understand that connection, because I think I heard you say perhaps we're understaffed in that area, but then we want an outside person to come in, but that doesn't change the staffing we have at the school-based level. And can we ever have enough staffing? And so I'm just curious about that.
I think when it comes to hate crimes, they are complicated, multi-layered, and unfortunately, I think humanity has been dealing with this for a very long time. I think our staff specialists are tasked with so many responsibilities. This responsibility, I think, in terms of dealing with hate and the support of those impacted, is something that requires concentrated attention that I don't think they have within their mandate and within their resources to be able to deal. As I said, 2 for 50, it doesn't make sense. Maybe it is to create a VSB staff member with, and that's going out into the world there and finding someone to become an on-staff member with that specialty, because this problem is not going away anytime soon. And someone that can focus their work on this, because I think it should happen parallel to the work that Selma Smith is doing, that and absolutely work together. But we need to, I think, be moving very quickly on this, and there are experts out there in the world that can be brought on very quickly to assist in creating a format framework that then they could then pass on to us to continue with the stuff. But I do think it requires a special skill set. And at that, with Reconciliation Canada, someone who attended a meeting with us, they facilitated a meeting prior to the event. Someone that was at that meeting is a registered clinical counselor, a specialist in trauma, grief counseling, PTSD. She came and she was shocked that this event happened. And something that was very poignant for me was someone being of the Jewish faith. She said, first thing I thought of when I saw a list was I went to my history and my family's history, to the Holocaust from World War II. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because it's an example of how far-reaching the implications of these acts are. It's not just the students, it's not just the staff, but it goes well beyond. And this is a specialist in trauma and grief counseling and reconciliation. Recognizing how serious this was and requiring of attention.
Okay, thank you. Sean?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you both for speaking today. A lot was said, and I'm just going to focus on a couple of things here. So I represent the district. The most important sentence, and I'll paraphrase that I heard from Tate, was that kids need to receive the level of attention and care they deserve. That should be our only consideration here. The question is, how do we get there? We all understand there might be constraints in terms of staff and personnel, but to draw on some of Nicholas's comments here, let's at least be transparent who are and what's actually being done. Let's be public about it. We know we don't have any resources, but let's at least have the conversations in the open together about what needs to actually happen there. What we've heard consistently when we've asked questions about this is that there's privacy attached to the issue, and it's generally associated with the perpetrator of an action. What I'd like to actually understand is what are the privacy concerns that we need to be concerned about when we're trying to provide care for those who are actually affected by action? Do those privacy concerns translate? Or can we actually conduct a separate process for those who are affected, or ideally a joint process, because you want this to be a reconciliation of everyone today, without stepping on some of these privacy concerns? Do we rely too much on that to not take action? Because that seems to be the blocker of having conversations when we try to appreciate them and what we can. I would be really interested in understanding if those privacy concerns are solely directed at traders, or whether or not to back into any process.
Jennifer?
Yeah, thanks to the chair, and I wanted to echo the chair's comments about the courage it takes to come and speak your own experience and to have come so far in a short period of time. You mentioned some things that worked well, which was around having this third-party engagement with Reconciliation Canada, having the space, your own like strength and capabilities. Was there anything else that you think that you wish you could have had in that situation? Like, are there other kind of tools or methods that you think could benefit from?
I think what would have probably been like as a student, and then just like as everyone involved, would be for it to be really held up to like when there's a letter sent, oh, we're going to talk to every student, and every student that was targeted will be contacted and spoken to by a counselor, whatnot, for that to be like really held true, and then like really followed through, and to have. But the thing is, I think sometimes, oh, well, if you have a problem, go speak to your counselor. But the majority of my problems, I don't feel comfortable talking to my counselor with, because my counselor is my counselor, but not mine, but also like the entire grade's counselor. So they already have so much on their plate, and they're doing courses and field trips and clubs and all these different things. So now some huge thing happens, and my counselor is now dealing with another 150 so students all on their own, talking about problems that they're having and stuff this is brought up for them, there should be like 10 like specialized people, like specialized counselors dealing with like trauma relief and talking about really deep emotional stuff that this might bring up. And then I think there's like a balance of responsibility where there's the school board can't provide everything. And that I think is realized. Like we said, there isn't unlimited resources and perhaps we can never be fully staffed. But the answer to that is not inaction and just, well, it can't happen. We do the best we can. And that's what I ask for, the best we can. And if that is in the form of specialists and more of them, that's what would be the best reaction immediately.
Tag on to that question. Without really changing much of anything that was done, to add on to John's comment, whatever was done, I think there could be far greater transparency that something is happening. Because something I mentioned over and over again to anyone who would listen is, in the absence of knowing that anything is happening, I have to conclude that nothing is going on. And I think it's a horrible feeling because, especially for the people that are doing fantastic work, I don't know. And so I can only imagine how, as Tate was mentioning, some of the students that don't have the internal resources, the external resources, they're really feeling like nothing. So just even communicating what we are doing is already leaps and bounds beyond. Now, and I think there's got to be a way where you can communicate that at the same time respecting confidentiality. Because, yeah.
Thank you very much. Those are great comments. Shannon?
Thank you both for coming out. And Tate, I think I heard you say that you felt you weren't safe in some spaces in your schools. What I'd like to ask is for our staff to have the appropriate follow-up with Tate to address that concern.
Thank you very, very much, Tate and Nicholas, for coming forward. Hopefully the system will become an even better place and a safer place for all of our students. So thanks again for coming. Okay, moving on to item 2.1, administrative procedures. Deputy, you're welcome to stay. Deputy Superintendent David Nelson.
Okay, so in your package, there is a Administrative Procedures Manual update. It's item 2.1. This is an overview of the ongoing work being done by staff and updating the Administrative Procedures Manual. This work began last year and the working group has reassembled this year. It's comprised of most of the same members as last year, with Chloe returning to a teaching assignment. Jill has joined us. But other than that, we have the same members. Cynthia did sit in for Debbie, but Debbie's intends to continue. So we met to review another group of administrative procedures on September 25th. And we reviewed a number of administrative procedures, many of which required some ongoing revisions and so have been sent back to staff. There was one procedure that was ready and has been reviewed and approved by the superintendent, and that was the administrative procedure for administrator and hiring of administrators. And that has been included as appendix in your package. In addition, this report outlines that during the summer, as committed to by staff, a review of the entire AP manual was undertaken. to update terminology, specifically looking at using and inserting gender neutral language, as well as replacing outdated language and updating language. So such language as, for example, replacing Aboriginal with Indigenous through the documents. None of the work undertaken changed the administrative procedures at all. It was strictly an updating of language and terminology. So the list of procedures that were updated for terminology is included in this package. So this item was for information. There is no action required on behalf of the board.
Okay, thank you very much. Any questions from trustees and stakeholders? Very much, David. Moving on.
Sorry, Chair, I have questions.
Oh, okay, go ahead, Sean.
Thank you, Chair. We're obviously very interested in the AP around district engagement. It's been one that we've been in conversation with the superintendent and Patricia McNeil for really a year on. And it was my understanding that that was going to come back for input from staff before it came to the working group. And I'm wondering if that was the case, or if there's going to be updates that we might be able to expect at some point in the near future, since we're going to be heading into a period where there's going to be a significant number of public engagements.
Through you, Chair, there were no concerns raised by the working group. I did acknowledge at that time that DPAC had some ongoing questions, so I asked Gord to bring them back to you. And in terms of regrouping and recircling with Patricia and Suzanne Hoffman around concerns, but the working group is ready, so we're waiting for that.
Ricky.
Yeah, hi. Referring back to the working group list and the stakeholder representatives, could I get some information on why the student aren't the BDSC isn't added to the list, and how come students aren't exactly represented in here?
Yeah, so through the chair, these procedures largely direct the work of staff. So the decision at the time of forming the working group is relevant to students. Certainly, if students would like to review procedures, I welcome any input they like to provide. That would be, however, challenge you like if you want to connect with me, because the intent was not to exclude. Just didn't feel it would be more relevant.
Okay, thank you.
Jennifer?
Thanks. Through the chair, has AP 431, administrator recruiting and hiring, always been an administrative procedure?
So through the chair, this is a new procedure, is my understanding, correct, Linda, or was this a revised?
It's revised.
This was a revised. So through Chair Trustee Reddy, when the revision of the policy manual happened, the district formerly had over 200 policies. Those policies were divided up into a policy handbook and administrative procedures manual. So this would have been a previous policy, which is now an admin procedure. That makes sense.
And Linda, did you want to speak on something else? Okay. Okay, thank you, David. Moving on to item 2.2, the approval.
This is a verbal update. In June of last year, the board passed a motion, which appears in the on item 2.2. And I'm going to update the committee on various items of this board motion. So the first was that the VSB acknowledged systems failures that have allowed PAC to go dated by school staff and board members as neutral, historic, and educational. So as this is a board acknowledgement, staff at this time are seeking direction from trustees as to how the board would envision making this acknowledgement, as it is the board's acknowledgement. Part 2, the VSB report on how the monument was placed on the grounds of the Colby Lang in 2017, including information about the decision makers. full invoices and contractors. So this report will be coming to the November facilities. The VSB presented a plan for reconciliation with Black, Indigenous people of color, BIPOC community, Parent Advisory Council, PAC, admin, educators, trustees, and students in order to take responsibility and reconcile. So again, on this motion, staff are seeking direction from the board as to scope and intent of the reconciliation. Specifically, does the board intend the reconciliation to be in regard to the monument specifically, or was the intent broader in scope for this reconciliation? So that would be necessary and helpful. And at the next policy and governance meeting, have an update on the revision of our renaming policy and to use a lens of reconciliation and anti-Black racism to guide this work. So the renaming working group, which was formerly the Naming and Renaming Committee, has held its first meeting. We met on September 24th. And as you may recall, if you were on this committee last year, we did complete the portion of recrafting the administrative procedure on naming, but we had left the administrative procedure on renaming until the naming was complete. So the committee met on the 24th. We have our next meeting planned for October 29th, and we have begun the conversation around renaming administrative procedure. It is clear to the committee members, given the amount of time it took to do a good job of developing a naming administrative procedure, that this will take time. We anticipate that in order to do this, we as a committee need to have a broader community conversations, and we will be planning to do that prior to bringing forward recommendations back through this committee as to some parameters for I would think that it likely in the spring we would have something more concrete to report.
Okay, thank you very much
Can I ask
for that update.
Question?
Okay.
Yeah, thanks through the chair. Thanks so much for the report and updates. Just a question about maybe actions to date with the school in terms of like the informing and follow up with them on the things, or kind of aftermath after the monument.
I know that the monument came and I do not have an update at this point.
Thank you. Okay, 3.1 is notice of
Sorry.
motion. Oh, yes, Janet?
Back to 2.2, staff are looking for direction from the board. I think there's no comments from stakeholders at this point, then we can work with the board of trustees in maybe in workshops or some other opportunity, provide that information to staff.
It's helpful. That's good information. Thank you, Janet. Okay, 3.1 on the colonial audit. Okay, Lois, go ahead.
Thank you. I don't really want to read the whole rationale, it's quite long. I'll read the motion and just speak briefly to it and then start discussion.
Sure.
The proposed motion reads that the Vancouver Board of Education directs staff to undertake a comprehensive colonial audit in order to identify both short-term and long-term opportunities and specific ways to improve VBE policies and practices with regard to reconciliation and anti-racism for an interim report back to the, there's a typo there, board in May 2020 and a final report in May 2021. First of all, I want to say, give thanks to the Vancouver Park Board for beginning their colonial audit in 2018. Seeing that, I was quite inspired to want to nudge the VB to do the same. My intention for this audit is to take a snapshot of the governance environment of the VSB and inspect it through the lens of reconciliation. But also I want to report to document how that is done and develop and document the methodology. And then of course for the report to recommend specific ways to improve. There are specific things that I'd like to also see the report cover, such as identification of major areas of colonial impact, and highlight areas where we need to work with other levels of government to strengthen our efforts, because this stuff doesn't happen in a vacuum, it's all interconnected. Yeah, I believe that this audit is, I really hope that this audit is going to be a part of an ongoing work that this isn't just like a one-time thing, you know, one and done kind of thing. I really want this to have, to be iterated upon and improved upon. I've read other reports that were kind of just one and done, and then they just kind of say, okay, well, yeah, we've done the audit, thanks. But I really hope that this will stick around and that we can do this in like the long term. You know, we're always looking for ways to make sure that our students and staff and everybody in the district feels safe and welcome and heard and seen. And I hope that this audit will be kind of one lens to find improvements in the system. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Stakeholders, go ahead, Catherine.
So some questions through the chair to Lois. And I did read the park board audit, or at least the preliminary report. What was it called? The Exploring Park Board Colonial Roots and Current Practices. And it's a pretty amazing document. It's really interesting historically, and park board is doing in terms of reconciliation. And in some ways, it's, you know, they're talking about place and land. It's I don't know if the school board is interested in looking. Also, we occupy, we sit on unceded Indigenous territory. So I have some questions, and I think the idea is actually interesting, and I think it would be important for certainly the school board to have a continual look at how are we doing in terms of inclusion. And so the question, so I mean, supportive, I mean, I think we would be certainly in support of a way to look at it, but just some questions around some of the underpinnings. So I'm curious about reconciliation and anti-racism. So when I look at a colonial audit, I guess, and I look at the park board one, it's really focused on reconciliation. And so if there's going to be inclusion of anti-racism, I think we would want to see an inclusion of misogyny. That's something certainly we hear about from our female students, from our female staff, our members, and homophobia, which, you know, linked likely to misogyny, but also is something to hear about. So I'm curious about that and how that fits into it. So is it just reconciliation, or is it all inclusion? And other inequities that we don't talk very much about are socioeconomic inequities, something that impacts our students, and of course, the cross section with some of the other barriers. So that's sort of questions as we read through the document. We haven't had time to take this to our executive, but just the table officers at our office. So we would like time to take this back to our executive to have a bigger conversation. But the table officers, those were questions that came to mind. And also questions around measurement, would this be measuring now? How would that be done? Surveying students, surveying staff. So start with some kind of baseline of data in order to know how it's moving forward. How would stakeholders be involved? I mean, diversity committee would seem to us a good place to take this also for another conversation, because the representatives of the diversity committee are fully engaged in diversity issues in the district. And, some of the things I look at around, conflict management, I'm curious, conflict between whom. So I don't know, it's just lots of questions, I guess, and they may be open-ended questions through the chair, but I'm sure our executive. Thanks for those points. But you may not have answers to.
Yeah,
Okay.
well, Cortesia, go ahead and then I'll go to Sean.
Chair. I had wanted it to, initially I had really wanted it to cover all the things that you had said. And then I started to really worry whether that was doable within the time frame that I wanted it to be done in. May 2020 seems like it would come up pretty quickly for an interim report. So I wanted to target it to something that I felt was more doable, that we are already on track. We have some sense of where we're going, and then maybe we can grow this to look at all the other areas of equities, like you say, which are also very important. If that's, I don't know what the procedure would be for taking to diversity. That sounds like a really good suggestion.
And Sean.
Mr. Chair, Catherine touched on two of the things I wanted to talk about. One was measurement, obviously. And the second is that this does, it either lacks specific focus or it's not broad enough. So I think you've actually covered a lot of those, Catherine. So we'll figure that out as we go, I guess. But the third question that I had, which Catherine didn't cover, was what's the role of the Board of Trustees in this process? And in particular, since you've called out VSB policies as one of the things to examine, and the board owns the policy handbook, what do you see the role, through the chair, what do you see the role of the board in the process?
Thank you, through the chair, to Sean. I think I would envision like a report to come back with suggestions to change policies and procedures in certain ways. And then as a board, we would take that and do them or comment on them or something. So it would be something that comes back to this committee to work on in some way, shape, or form, possibly with a working group. I haven't thought super far about that yet. I really like for, the first step of the report is to see what we have first, see what the gaps are, places we can improve, and then we can figure out how to make those improvements.
So is it the will of I think this is a broad, massively broad topic that needs to be fleshed out more, and the recommendation of the committee here to have this go through to the diversity committee to flesh it out more and have that conversation, or
Thank you, Chairperson. The diversity committee met yesterday. Very active committee, and not on this, but the broader crisis. Although we have a lot on our agenda, we move some stuff to the next agenda. It is proper to have chair to a little more formal that it goes to the diversity committee, because there's just so many agenda items there. So I would hope that the stakeholder groups all agree, then the chair to actually formally request this go to, in part, discussion.
So is everyone in agreement that they should do that? Okay, yes.
And I
Janet?
think I also heard VSTA said they like more time to go back to their executive as it comes back to, maybe I can clarify that. Would you like to take it to your executive committee and then come back to this committee?
Okay, Jill, take.
Yeah,
my
go
turn.
ahead, Jill. You're next anyways.
I would agree too that we would like to have some more time for it to come back to our executive, and I mean, it could come back through us bringing it back from this meeting, or it could come back through the diversity. There's, it's just, it would happen either way.
David?
I would suggest, Chair, given the diversity committee would to provide feedback, that feedback come back to this committee,
Mhm.
and then this committee discuss further at that point, or to,
Right.
and that would give our stakeholders time to bring further information from the groups.
Okay, Catherine?
It's just through the chair. I mean, I know from our own organization that, you know, motions come and they're referred back and they're discussed, and what actually comes forward the next time is quite different. It's got the same intention, but it can be quite different. And I did hear Trustee Champ Headley talk about, you know, want to examine what we're doing now. We know right at the same time there's an equity scan going on for our Indigenous learners over in another room. We know that a call has been put out for anti-racism leads in our school. So there are things that are being attended to. So maybe it goes back to diversity, there's a discussion, and then comes back with a recommended way to approach it possibly. So maybe before we take it back to our stakeholders, hash that a little bit more diversity, it comes back here, is one thought. I mean, ultimately it's up to the trustees how they want to manage that. But.
Well, I think, yeah, I think here the stakeholders can make that recommendation, and I'm getting the sense that that's where we're going here from all the people that have spoken. So, and that also gives you some time to your executive. So I think that's a good suggestion. Thank you very much, Helen, for that. And we'll. Yes, Jennifer?
Thanks through the chair. Yeah, thanks Trustee Pedley for bringing this forward. I think it's a interesting concept and it matches a lot of the processes happening elsewhere. I also just wanted to ask if you had more clarification or some suggestions on, so the combination of reconciliation and anti-racism, I think is an important one because reconciliation stemming from anti-racist narratives as well, and from racist systemic policies and practices. So I wonder, like, was that a deliberate combination, or do you see them as like separate pieces?
Thanks, through the chair to Trustee Reddy. Yeah, it was a deliberate thing because I see those two as being quite closely linked. And yet they're both really big. So I think, to echo what Sean said, I think it's either too broad or too not specific enough. And so I worry if we make it broader, then we won't have quite enough time by, you know, to get something back by May, and that might have to get delayed, and I would find that frustrating personally. Yeah, but maybe that work needs to be done hand in hand because they're so closely linked. So maybe the right thing to do would be to expand the scope a little.
Sean?
Thank you, Chair. May I just, for my own edification, just understand what we're asking the Diversity Committee to do? I thought I heard Trustee Wong say that we would request for the Diversity Committee for involvement, and yet it sounds like we're delegating this to diversity. And in conjunction with that, it sounds like the Diversity Committee has a very full agenda at the moment. What are we asking them to give up in order to put this on their agenda?
That through to Alan. I'm not sure, just before Alan was collecting his thoughts here. I think that we're giving time for the executive and the elementary and secondary executive. So if that component has to happen, and then the diversity committee is going to, I believe, start to flesh it out more, whether it is too broad or whether it's not broad enough. And that kind of thing will come, that kind of ideas will come back to this committee, but I'm not sure, maybe I don't want to take any words out of your mouth. Go ahead, Alan.
I was actually going to ask the question of when we bring it to the diversity committee, how broad or focused this is, because it doesn't really state in the motion. The first thing is that the diversity committee is talking about either having a subgroup or a separate committee that leads up to diversity, and that hasn't been fully finalized yet of which direction they're going to go. So that is part of the heavy agenda, amongst many other things. I think it's important that the diversity committee, and they're not aware of this as formally as a committee with regards to this motion. So if we could bring it to the diversity committee, them to have a discussion, maybe part of, and if this committee can provide how focused or broad it is, that we can have that discussion and ask for their thoughts, their opinion with regard to this. And then to give them the example of the Vancouver Parks Board, their direction as well in this. So it's their asking for their thoughts on how broad or not, and given what we can provide them.
On that diversity committee, maybe that would be something might be helpful to the attendants, just to help.
Because to me, I think the discussion at this stage is how broad or how focused it is.
Is that true, David?
Yeah, so just the role of the diversity committee is advisory committee. So what we be doing in this case is asking them to review this motion and provide advice from their perspective as a committee back through to this committee. That's why we wanted to report back. So, and again, I don't sit on that committee, but my understanding, Trustee Wong, is that the committee could invite someone to present.
Which they have on
So
other issues.
they could invite Cham Headley to share her intent and then gather more information, correct?
Correct. But Chair, I didn't want to halt the process amongst all other stakeholder groups as well, because as I stated, diversity just met yesterday, and we have to give them the information. Then they'll take it back to their stakeholder groups, and then it'll come back. As Sean was saying, that given the urgency of this, given the time frame in the motion itself, that something will have to law for that discussion to occur earlier than later.
Sean, last words? Oh, sorry. Okay, Catherine, I didn't see your hand.
Thank you, through the chair. Just given the nature of this particular endeavor and the need to make sure that the communities that we want input from are actually represented, do we know that representation is available just through the diversity committee, or do we need to actually look to increase representation to make sure that some of the groups that we want to specifically hear from as part of this process are there from the beginning?
Chair, the membership of the diversity committee does include, but again, and right as staff, I do have that question here somewhere, but again, I think given the scope of this, the intent of the review or the discussion of diversity is to provide feedback. This is at the moment a notice of motion. So it's to help inform the motion. Should the motion be adopted by the board, then I would presume that it would include what you're speaking of, Sean, which is broader outreach to actually do this.
Catherine?
I guess this is a question through the chair to maybe all the trustees. I don't know how it works in terms of connecting with school board staff and how you operate. Because I guess we're lucky we get to call you up whenever we want. So I don't know how it works up with trustees, but you know, we have this Indigenous Education Department. They're over in room 20 doing an equity scan for Indigenous students. It's a department that the board has grown. It continues to grow. Positions continue to be posted, doing a lot of work, not specifically with governance structures. That's a completely separate thing, but working directly with our students and supporting our members, and some of them are our members. So I don't know how it works in terms of, you know, trustees contacting these people saying, hey, what is going on in your department? Help me understand what might be missing in terms of reconciliation and governance structures and that kind of thing. So there are people in this building that certainly do a lot of this work. Maybe don't look at it through that lens, and so that's a different question for them, and they may not have an answer. I can't speak for them, but we do have people in this building that certainly could contribute to this conversation, that I think should be included somehow.
Jennifer?
Yeah, just through the chair, in my comment, I'm the trustee liaison for the Indigenous Education Committee, so I think that would be a really great group to engage. A lot of the focus is on student experience so far and what kinds of areas we want to grow in. But I'm sure they would welcome the opportunity to connect.
Alan?
And I would suggest going to the committee as well, but Chaz Desjardins is an active member of the diversity committee, and there's a lot of discussion with regards to the Indigenous education focus, and that would be all encompassing, but it's also important to bring to the Indigenous diversity, Indigenous community.
I have one last question, because I'm trying to absorb it and understand it. So when I read it, it looks like it's really, I guess, a question perhaps to the mover of the motion or open for discussion. It's really about governance. Like if it's really, maybe that is the scope, that when I look at the motion, it says the intention is to document a methodology for conducting the audit, which I think is actually probably a big task, maybe not, I don't know, I'm not a methodologist, but is to take a snapshot of the governance environment and to inspect it through the lens of reconciliation specifically, which is why I asked the original question around reconciliation and anti-racism together, and that's how big is the scope, and to recommend to the VBE specific ways to improve. So if it's really just about governance, then that's a different question than thinking about student, not that they aren't connected, but there's sort of an indirect connection. So I guess that's still just a question around the scope of the motion, and that's how we get things going. We put them out, we talk about it, and we come back about it, but it might be helpful to think about, is it just about governance, or is this about what's happening in our schools and the connection between?
Okay, thank you for all your comments, and Lois, I think the diversity committee will be able to hopefully address that to some degree after some more thought when they meet. Hopefully we'll get that some advice coming back to this committee, and it is a huge topic. So thank you for bringing that forward. 3.2, the notice of motion, responding to hate-motivated crimes. This is field expert. Oh, sorry, Jennifer.
Thanks. Yeah, through the chair. Thanks. So I'll just kind of briefly go through a few of the rationale points and then read the motion. And this motion is coming from Strategic Plan Goal 1, 2, 3, and 4. Yeah, so some of the rationale is around the Vancouver School Board, through work on responding to hate-motivated crimes, can support the Government of Canada's efforts to take action against systemic racism and religious discrimination, including Islamophobia. This is a formalized document through the federal government. And it relates to 4 specific offenses considering hate propaganda or hate crimes that are referenced in the criminal code, including advocating genocide, public incitement to hatred where likely to lead to a breach of the peace, and willful promotion of hatred and mischief promoted by hate in relation to religious property. Also, that the Charter of Rights and Freedoms ensures that every individual is equal before and under the law and has the right to equal protection and equal benefit of the law without discrimination, and in particular without discrimination based on race, national or ethnic origin, color, religion, sex, age, or mental or physical disability. That hate crimes result in increased violence, that children and youth who experience hate and racism in school report a higher dropout rate, and VSB's Aboriginal student dropout rate remains high. And the Vancouver School Board has an opportunity to protect our schools against hate by setting expectations for and building the capacity with students, staff, administrators, senior management, and board members. The board has declared its commitment to address racism, specifically anti-Black, anti-Indigenous, and Islamophobia. Finally, children, youth, parents, and community members have petitioned the school board to outline a clear response on the actions taken after a hate-motivated incident has occurred. Our board can benefit from a clear plan to immediately respond to hate in our communities by being prepared to discuss how our schools might respond in clear and unambiguous terms. The safety of students and staff are of paramount concern in any crisis. The Vancouver School Board is one of the largest, most diverse school districts in Canada and does not yet have an anti-racism policy in place. Finally, that reported hate crimes in Canada have increased 64%, targeting Black, Arab, Indigenous, or West Asian populations, as well as targeting religion, including the Jewish and Muslim communities, and sexual orientation, with Vancouver having one of the highest rates of reported hate crimes among Canada's biggest regions. So the motion is that the VSB hire a field expert to establish a policy that outlines an impact-focused, structured response to hate-motivated crimes and or actions as evidenced by the breach of a student or child's or staff's safety. That this policy clearly outline a structured response in the immediate, short, and long term for directly impacted student staff, indirectly impacted student staff, and perpetrators, and should specifically include 3 parts. First, a clear, transparent, and accountable actions to be taken by administration staff in the case of an incident. Second, that there's a process of restorative justice, accountability, and restitution for impacted students and staff and for student perpetrators. And finally, a commitment to full and complete communication with students directly impacted, their designated caregivers of students, the perpetrator and their caregivers, and the broader school community about any incident, whilst maintaining proper measures of student and staff confidentiality.
That's very concise and to the point, and I think very comprehensive. Stakeholders, comments, concerns? Yes.
Just a question through the chair. When you, I may have a better idea of this now after the delegation spoke, but when you say field expert, what would that be?
Yeah, in specific, because this is a policy piece, I think that's the key sort of starting point to have the conversations around what this would actually look like to ensure that we're within the purview of the criminal code, but also recognizing confidentiality and student safety. So I think having that field expertise from a policy perspective would be just through the chair.
I certainly think this, any executive
Sorry.
follow-up? Sure,
Yeah,
go
sorry.
ahead, Jill.
So is there like would it be someone from Reconciliation Canada or something specific like that that you were looking for, or a consultant, or?
Through the chair, I think any number or a combination of what you're suggesting could be useful. I mean, finances are a factor as well. There are other policies that have been made by districts, which I've referenced here, including Abbotsford and Burnaby school districts, and then another one made by Aboriginal Women's Services by the BC Ministry, which I think give us a starting point of potential consultants or experts, which may include, I think, like civil society, like Reconciliation Canada.
Great. I'd like to see Janet.
There was a concern or a question raised earlier about confidentiality of students, of perpetrators and those impacted. And here is also a commitment to full and complete communication while maintaining confidentiality. I'm wondering, how would we balance those two pieces in the policy?
So I don't have an answer specifically to that question right now. What I can share is that the district staff have been working with, are engaging on a more ongoing basis, the support of safer schools, considered to be experts in the area of making sure our schools are safe. All of our students and staff. Meeting with them again this week to discuss how they can continue to support the district. So they would be some information in terms of the legal parameters. We do have legal counsel. All of our policies and have them provide advice around our requirements as a district, specifically in this regard, protecting and ensuring staff and student privacy.
I can just, go ahead.
Chair, I have a question. Is it possible that some of the confidentiality rights, they have to some be given up in order to do your work? Some, not all, some. Sign up agreement. I will give up some of my confidentiality in order to get work done that I'm expecting.
Challenging question. I'm sure some people can look into that, but I don't think we have an answer at this point. There could be legal issues involved in that. Sean?
I think through the chair, and thank you, Trustee Fraser, for that question. I think what I was asking, and it comes back to the original premise from the delegation, it's whether or not there is, what is that balance between maintaining confidentiality, because we are in some cases going to be talking about minor perpetrators. And so I understand that there is a necessity to actually protect their identity and certain information. But the balance there is also, if we're going to use that as a reason to not provide support and care for anyone who's been affected, then I think we're doing a disservice to our district. So the question comes, what can we still do to provide that care while still maintaining the confidentiality on the one side? And to me, it seems like there's still a lot of support that we can provide that we aren't providing right now. That should be, and we have to stop hiding behind confidentiality on its own. So that's a bit muddled. But I think the original question here was, what is the PII, the personal information and confidentiality that we have to respect for the minor perpetrators? And then what is the whole realm of things that we can actually talk about when we want to engage students and staff and anyone else who's been affected? And I'm sure that there is a whole domain there that we can still enter into that doesn't require us to touch on the privacy of the care. I was just wondering really if we can actually examine a little bit what the privacy is that we're required to maintain, and then start having a conversation about all the things we should be doing outside of that to help people.
So through you, Chair, certainly that is something that staff could take away with us. I will also add, though, that we communicate on a regular basis with legal counsel around issues regarding privacy, around our obligation as a district. That very seriously, and we do seek advice and guidance all the time. We also will be working specifically with Safer Schools on helping us in terms of our broader, helping us in terms of when we're responding to an incident, how we're ensuring that our response takes into a broad consideration the community and the impacts on they have been impacted. That is part of the currently undertaking, working with Safer Schools and working with Ministry of Education specifically.
Jenna?
So I have another question, reading the wording for Trustee Reddy. There was a specific reference to student perpetrators. I wonder if the policy is thought of in light of possibly being staff perpetrators as well. Because there's a lot of reference to students and staff in other aspects of the proposed motion.
Chair, I agree with Trustee Fraser's comment there. I think what you're saying is the word student may be superfluous there. I think just perpetrator may be sufficient.
That's something maybe you could make an amendment to later at some point. Coming through. It's good information. Carmen?
I mean, I guess speaking on behalf of employees, if an employee perpetrator, there's actually a separate process for that. Doesn't mean that the board not want to address student concerns, but staff perpetrators, because that actually falls under the purview of different process as defined by the collective agreement. So.
Okay, you want to go ahead one more time and then?
Sorry, thank you, Chair. Just in response to that comment, I understand that there's a different way of having to address a student versus a staff perpetrator, but I think when we're talking about the effect on those who are actually who were affected and actually require support, I don't sure that would look any different. Though I do take your point that there's definitely considerations from a legal perspective there.
So, go ahead.
So can I suggest that I will send this motion through in advance of, and then what we're going to do to board legal counsel for any thoughts in terms of legalities in relation to this. As well, I'm happy to discuss this with Safer Schools in our meeting, which is tomorrow.
Timing.
To get any thoughts or feedback. So certainly you could share that back. I'm not, again, with trustees, the decision I think at this point is where does it to the board at this point, or
I think it should probably come back here, but I'll look to the members of the committee here, the stakeholders. What is your feeling here? Alan?
Back here, we're getting legal advice. Some of the issues and some of the wording as well, with regards to perpetrator.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yes,
Jenna?
I know it's an important piece and we want to move it forward as quickly as possible, but I think we also have to do it very well. And
It has to be right.
Catherine's raised the question about collective agreements and how that could be incorporated. So I don't want to get us into a place where we end up somewhere unexpected by moving forward too quickly.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Going on to the next item is
there's a report. So this is item 4.1, and it is an item requiring action on the part of trustees. Here. Okay, so this is a follow-up to a board motion on non-discrimination and elimination of racism. At the June 24th, 2019 board meeting, the board adopted a motion that the board shall, in consultation with stakeholder and staff, include in Vancouver School policy the board's commitment to non-discrimination and the elimination of racism. So for clarity's sake, when the Administrative Procedures Manual was created and the policy handbook, the work was undertaken by the previous board, the administrative procedure, what were previously all policies were converted into a policy handbook and administrative procedures manual. And in part of that, there had been a previous board policy on non-discrimination. That was not, that continues to exist. It is now an administrative procedure, Administrative Procedure 170. And this administrative procedure outlines the district's commitment to providing safe, inclusive, and equitable teaching and learning environments for all students, staff, and families. It's included as Appendix A, or the reference to the committee. The background section includes a variety of statements in terms of providing environments free of discrimination. So it states that the district believes in equitable treatments for all individuals, regardless of race, color, ancestry, ethnic origin, religion, socioeconomic status, gender, sexual orientation, physical or mental ability, or political beliefs. The letter and spirit of the Canadian Human Rights Act and the BC Human Rights Code shall be carefully observed, enforced, and supported, so that all members of the school community may work together in an atmosphere of respect and tolerance for individual differences. Further, the background states the practice of non-discrimination shall prevail in all matters of instruction and course selection, in employment, promotion, and assignment of staff, in providing access to facilities, in the choice of instruction materials, and career guidance and counseling, and in all matters pertaining to community relations. Further foundational statements in the AP are the district acknowledges racial and cultural diversity of the communities it serves. The district supports the elimination of direct and systemic discrimination and racism. The district affirms its commitment to eliminating racism and promoting the educational employment equity. And the district acknowledges that all members of the school community, staff, students, parents, and stakeholders share responsibility for creating welcoming and inclusive environments which honors and respects everyone. So this AP 170 was developed and adopted originally in 2011 by the board as a policy, and then was converted into an administrative procedure in September of 2018 as part of, as I mentioned, the policy and governance restructuring. District staff have recently begun a review of the AP in order to ensure it is current, comprehensive. So in looking at the board motion, staff have determined two options to address the motion. Option A would be to include a commitment to non-discrimination and the elimination of racism into board policy, policy number 1, which is the board's foundational statement. So in this option, the board's commitment to non-discrimination and the elimination of racism, as outlined in AP 170, would be duplicated and incorporated into the board's foundational statement. That's policy 1. Option 2 would be to create a new board policy specific to the board's commitment to the elimination of racism and non-discrimination. So the board's commitment to non-discrimination and the elimination of racism, which is currently contained in AP 170, would be converted into policy and included in the policy handbook. The remaining sections of the AP, which are the procedures and the definitions, would remain as an administrative procedure. With both options, staff would bring back proposed language of a revised or new policy to the Policy and Governance Committee for stakeholder review and input prior to it being forwarded to the board option. So it's recommended the board determine which option, A or B, they wish to follow in amending the board policy handbook in order to address the June 24th, 2019 motion. And again, the attached is AP 170, discrimination.
Thank you very much. Okay, so looking for some input from the committee here to see which option you'd like to do. Those?
Thank you, Chair. I'm wondering if would either of the option impact the review of the administrative procedure 170 that's Or would it kind of get rolled into it and we get the revised?
Through the chair, the review of the AP is underway now, and it will go through the procedure we've established, which is whatever portion of it remains an administrative procedure back through the work group. So under option one, the administrative procedure would remain but be revised, but that would go back through the work group. Under option two, the what is considered like the foundational statements portion of the AP would be moved into policy. Could be updated then, but that would be updated through this committee versus the administrative procedures working group. Rest of the AP could continue to be updated by staff through the
So I'm thinking this through about which option would have more impact for the district. I think we have foundational statements about what, the foundational statements capture the core of what we want to do as a board. So I feel it's impactful to have this piece in those, but to have a separate policy specific to anti-racism is also impactful. But then I come back to the point that Catherine raised earlier about, are we focusing on just one area of inequity when we know there are many areas of inequity in society, and that's reflected in the district. So coming back to the, is it too broad or too narrow conversation, would it be better to have within the foundational statements all those equity statements, so we're very clear about what we're doing. Because if we go with the option of having a separate policy for anti-racism, then do we have a separate policy for misogyny? Do we have a separate policy for all the different aspects that were raised? So I'm in two minds.
Yeah.
Still. I don't.
Jennifer.
Yeah, thanks through the chair. Two questions. One was, we adopted this in June to be a policy, to reinstate a policy. So it's moving something from an administrative procedure to a policy.
So the motion on June 24th was the board shall, in consultation with stakeholders and staff, include in Vancouver School Board policy the board's commitment to non-discrimination and the elimination of racism. So the motion as passed does not state specifically how that would be done. So the staff undertook options, the consideration of the board as to how you may actualize that. So one was the embedding of those principles of and commitment to non-discrimination and elimination of racism in the foundational statements of the board and the policy. Or as Trustee Fraser was just speaking about, creating a new, call it a freestanding, standing on its own policy around racism and non-discrimination. So those are the two.
And just thanks through the chair thing, just as a follow-up. So thanks for clarifying that. So just kind of going back, as a staff person in the district previously, I know that there was a lot of consultation with individuals to build the anti-racism non-discrimination policy, and that it is quite standard for districts to have something like this. So I'm wondering if we could see what other districts are using. I know the superintendent had spoken about Toronto District School Board and engaging with them on some of the language. So that might help guide us.
So through the chair, we certainly can do that. That would take some time to do, and we have. So I just want to be clear, the direction of the board is to bring back more information prior to.
It's a good suggestion. It's going to be helpful for us. But what about others? Ellen?
I'm through the chair. I'm a little more committed at this stage. We haven't lived through a year and a half ago. Policy moved over to AP, and there are a number of things that moved out of AP, and we've always stated that at the time could decide on certain items to move back. And I think this is one of those items. There's a lot to be discussed at the time, a year and a half ago. Living through that time and living through full discussion and the multitude of motions with regards to anti-racism that has gone through the board and the discussion this evening as well. Notwithstanding what the VSTA said, there are a number of other items, but given that this was in policy in the past, I think this is a timely requirement to have this to be created as a new board policy, so option B, and to make, and I think that's most impactful. I think that is right forward with that rather than bring it back to committee. So I'll choose option B.
I'm also in support of option B, just looking at the existing structure of the of all the different policies. We have SOGI as a standalone policy as well, and I think this fits on that same kind of level, and it makes sense with it created in that same way.
Still on the fence, Janet?
No, I haven't heard anyone speak against going with option B, so I'd be comfortable with
Okay.
section. But I think, as we talk about our equity work and reconciliation, we'll probably have to come back to this at some later date through the work that's currently ongoing.
Can I just see clarity, Chair?
Yep.
So the recommendation as written is that we would staff take what's currently, and if you want to reference it, AP 170, we would take the background section of AP 170. It needs to be updated. So we would want to update it and bring it back to this committee following the board's direction at the end of this month. And that would then become the policy. Staff's recommendation, unlike SOGI, which was taken in entirety into the policy manual and can include a lot of procedural information, we would not envision that happening with this. We would envision taking the background, which is the guiding high-level principle, and then making that the policy portion, and keeping the procedural portions and the definitions portions to support that policy in the AP. The recommendation of staff. It probably should have happened with SOGI, but it got moved over in its entirety, so it's there now, but we want to look at that. This policy really should be the high level guidance, and procedures are the directions and instructions for staff. So I just wanted to clarify that was the recommendation. Trustees.
Yes, Alan?
I agree with that. I think that's the appropriate way to go. Is it fusing to actually deal with SOGI policy AP at the same time, or does that have to go through the working group?
It is a board policy, so if it's the will of the board, I could bring back the subsequent policy and governance meeting recommendation around SOGI. Because that wouldn't be working group because it's policy.
Someone to deal that up today, or?
I will look into it. I will look at it and bring back.
It might be useful for us to work through the process for this one.
Yes.
To see how that works, because it'll come back to committee and we'll have more input.
So we're going to move forward to the board then. My understanding, Chair, is the recommendation of this committee for option B, but it will be the board's decision which one they choose.
Yeah. Okay. Great, that's our recommendation. Okay. And the date and the time. Any items for the future agenda? or anything you want to add? Date and time for the next meeting is December 4th at 6:30. Thank you, everyone. It was a very worthwhile meeting and lots of great feedback. Thank you very much.
Thank you.